So last week, we left off with Joseph. Joseph was, he's just been sold into slavery to be dragged across the desert, taken down to Egypt in chains. And, if this was a film, I'm sure they made films, but if this was a film, this would be like the perfect kind of cliffhanger moment. Like when we're watching a film and we're engaged, we're wondering, and we're like, what is going to happen next? Yeah? What's going to happen to Joseph now? What's going to happen to him now? And we want to know. And we want to know now what's going to happen. But like many movies, yeah, where we land tonight, chapter 38, yeah, the text cuts to a different scene away from Joseph, what's happening with him. It goes to a new scene that on the surface, it probably seems unrelated. It's like a subplot to do with his brother Judah. It's a dark chapter. It's definitely not child-friendly, chapter 38 of Genesis. It can feel like a real uncomfortable interruption, but actually it's a brilliant, deliberate contrast by, the author himself, the Holy Spirit, moved Moses to write this, yeah? What's happening is he's providing a contrast between Judah, who we're going to have in chapter 38, to Joseph, giving us examples of a life that is given over to sin, or a life that is given over to trusting God and the grace of God, and the different outcomes between those two lives and the fruit of those lives. This chapter 38, it's going to cover like 20 years, which, 20 years, we're like, yeah, but Joseph, where is he? What's happening with him? Well, unless the Lord decides to take us home this evening, we will get there, chapter 39, okay? So, let's go ahead and pray, and we'll begin. Lord, we thank you for your word and how you have intentionally put it together to reveal yourself to us, to teach us about yourself and your character, to let us know of things that have happened in the past, to teach us about ourselves, and giving you opportunity to speak to us by your Spirit. Things that will encourage us, things that may convict us. And so, Lord, we ask that as we've opened your word this evening, that you would have opportunity to do that perfect work of what you want to do this evening. And that, God, if there's any Judah-likeness in our lives, that God, that would end, and that we would become more Joseph-like, which is more Jesus-like. And so, Lord, we give you this time and ask that you would help me to communicate the truth of your word. In Jesus' name, amen. Chapter 38, verse 1. It happened at that time of when Joseph is being taken down to Egypt, that Judah went down from his brothers and turned aside to a certain Adulamite whose name was Hira. There Judah saw the daughters of a certain Canaanite whose name was Shua. He took her and went into her, and she conceived and bore a son, and he called his name She conceived again and bore a son and called his name Onan. Yet again she bore a son, and she called his name Shelah. Judah was in Chezib when she bore him. And Judah took a wife for his firstborn, and her name was Tamar. Okay, so we're told that Judah, that he departed from where his family was, and he went down and he turned aside. Now, Jacob's family, we've already seen, it's dysfunctional. It is a mess, and it's continuing to fall apart. Right? We already saw, Simeon and Levi, mass murder of the men of Shechem and taking all of their stuff. Reuben, he slept with Jacob's concubine Bilhah. And then that was followed by all of the sons hating Joseph, selling him into slavery for some coin, and then going home and deceiving Jacob, who was the master deceiver, right? Convincing him that Joseph had been slain by a beast and keeping up the pretenses about that, even though they've seen their father broken over his death. Yeah? Now Judah, he goes down, we're told. And it's his choosing to do this. He's choosing to move away from his family that, they're a mess, but they are the covenant family that God has promised that he would bless. And Judah has decided, no, I don't want to be there with them. I want to go to the Canaanites, the pagan people around me, and I want to have friends there. And I've got friends now. I want to marry a Canaanite woman, and I want to have kids. And after I have kids, I want my kids to be married to Canaanites, so I get a Canaanite woman to marry my son. Okay? This is bad. Judah, he's isolated himself from God's covenant family that God has promised to bless. He's choosing to assimilate into Canaanite culture, which he's supposed to be, as a covenant son, he's supposed to be distinctly separate from. Okay? And that's the thing about sin. Sin, it always takes us farther from where we want to go, and it wants to keep us longer away than we want to stay there, to bring us down. He went down in not just geographically, but physically, spiritually. Verse 7, but Judah's firstborn, was wicked in the sight of the Lord, and the Lord put him to death. Wow. Okay, so his name means to be awake or watchful. Okay? But there's an irony here. It's kind of tragic. The Hebrew word that is used for wicked here, that he was wicked in the sight of the Lord, it's the reverse of his name. Okay? So it's Ra. Probably not pronouncing it right, but that's the letters. Okay? So instead of being spiritually awake, his character is the opposite. And it's been translated as wicked. The root of that, it means to spoil, to ruin, or to break in pieces. So his name is to be awake, but he's living the opposite of that. Yeah? And so we see that the further bad fruit of Judah's decision to go down, dwell with the Canaanites, immerse himself with the Canaanites, he's raised a son that is so wicked that God takes his life. That's pretty bad, right? Consider how wicked people have been already that we've encountered. And God still allowed many of them to live. Yeah? Must have been a pretty wicked guy for God's long suffering to stop and for him to be put to death. And so, he serves as a stark warning for those that pursue wickedness, thinking that they can get away with it, because one day they won't, and maybe their lives will be shorter than they could have been. Okay? Verse 8. Then Judah said to Onan, "Go into your brother's wife and perform the duty of a brother-in-law to her, and raise up offspring for your brother." But Onan knew that the offspring would not be his, so whenever he went into his brother's wife, he would waste the semen on the ground, so as not to give offspring to his brother. And what he did was wicked in the sight of the Lord, and he put him to death also. So, apologies once again for the graphic nature of the text, but God is letting us know very openly the sins of Judah's family. They're being exposed. Yep. And I'm sure there's other things that we're not told about. Judah's, what's happening here, even though sin, it tries to promise that it will be able to keep itself secret, it's going to be exposed. It's going to come out one way or another. Jesus said this to the Pharisees about their sin of hypocrisy, but there's a wider principle here. He says, "Nothing is covered up that will not be revealed, or hidden that will not be known. Therefore, whatever you have said in the dark shall be heard in the light, and what you have whispered in private rooms shall be proclaimed on the housetops." Hey, it's never hidden from God. He always knows. He hears and sees and knows all. Yeah? Okay. Judah, he has instructed his second son, Onan, to perform the duty of a brother-in-law. This is it's a Levirate marriage is what it is. This was the practice that would eventually be codified in the Mosaic law in Deuteronomy. And what the reason for this, because this is weird for us, I know. It was designed to preserve the memory of the deceased man, and to provide a legal heir as a descendant for him. It was also to provide for the widow, because they didn't have, national insurance, social security, whatever, wherever you come from. They didn't have that kind of stuff in place. And so that the offspring was to support their mother, okay? And it also was to protect any kind of inheritance that it would go to the descendants of that man, okay? So Judah is asking Onan to do this for his wife. But he's not necessarily saying that he should marry her. So he's not necessarily saying that he should fulfill this role completely, okay? In the way that it's phrased. Yeah. He's asking him to have sexual relations with her so that she would conceive and bear a child. Now, Onan appears to be just as wicked as his brother or worse, and he's willing to trick Tamar into having sexual relations with her in order for his physical pleasure and power over her, but he did not actually want to get her pregnant, which that was the whole purpose. He wasn't supposed to be having relations with her for any other reason. Yeah, but he's taking advantage of her. Yeah, and it doesn't seem like Judah that he really cares that much. He doesn't even call her by name. He's just looking to keep his firstborn son's lineage going. And then, of course, Onan is he's totally taking advantage of her. And the Lord's like, no, we're not having that. And so God's wrath takes him out. So he dies somehow. God, seeing the unjust treatment of Tamar at really the hands of Onan and Judah. Yeah, she's been oppressed. Verse 11. Then Judah said to Tamar, his daughter-in-law, remain a widow in your father's house till Shelah, my son, grows up. For he feared that he would die, like his brothers. So Tamar went and remained in her father's house. Okay. So Judah is so compromised in his own sin that he fails to see this, it looks like, the sins of his sons that lead to their deaths. He's superstitious, and he seems to think that the problem is actually with Tamar, and that if he gives his last son to Tamar, he's a dead man too. And so he's like, he's too young now, and so let's just wait. And so you go to your father's house, you go be a widow for a while, okay? So he's hoping to really to pass her off. Well, that's not going to happen. Verse 12. In the course of time, the wife of Judah, Shua's daughter, died. When Judah was comforted, he went up to Timnah to his sheep shearers, he and his friend Hira the Adullamite. And when Tamar was told, your father-in-law is going up to Timnah to shear his sheep, she took off her widow's garments and covered herself with a veil, wrapping herself up, and sat at the entrance of Enaim, which is on the road to Timnah. For she saw that Shelah was grown up, and she had not been given to him in marriage. When Judah saw her, he thought she was a prostitute, for she had covered her face. He turned to her at the roadside and said, come, let me come into you, for he did not know that she was his daughter-in-law. She said, what will you give me that you may come in to me? Okay, so Judah's wife has died. He had a time of mourning. He's now going to shear, where the sheep are being sheared. Now, sheep shearing, there was more than the sheep being sheared that was going on. It was very much like a harvest festival, because wool was a source of income and trade. And so the fact that you've got the wool and you can make a profit on it and you're living off of it, it was a reason to celebrate. And so that celebration was usually accompanied with days of a good amount of feasting and drinking and other forms of merriment. Yeah? Okay. Tamar has realized that Judah is not planning on giving his third son to her in marriage. And so she dresses as a temple prostitute. Okay? And this takes place where she meets him is at Enaim, okay, which means, the name means opening of the eyes. Okay? Now Judah, he is blinded by his sin, and he's blinded to Tamar's identity as well. And it's significant that he thinks that the fact that she's wearing a veil is a huge bell ringer, okay? That means that he thought that she was a temple prostitute, yeah? An ordinary prostitute, well, now we get to talk about prostitution tonight too. An ordinary prostitute would not wear a veil, okay? She would do everything to make herself look attractive and not worry about the veil. The veil was connected to temple prostitutes because supposedly when people had relations with the prostitute and the prostitute is veiled, it was as if they were having relations with whatever god or goddess that they were seeking to make a connection with. Okay? So here's Judah, right? And he thinks that she's a prostitute, and not just a prostitute, but a prostitute that is is dedicated to a Canaanite god, and to have sexual relations with her was to enter into a form of pagan worship. That's what he's doing. It's not good. Yeah? And you can just see, he's prepared to do this. He wants to do this. She requests a form of payment, and she's going to shrewdly ask for a bit more than that, as we'll see. So verse 17, he answered, I will send you a young goat from the flock. And she said, if you give me a pledge until you send it. So his promise is, I'll give you a young goat. That will be the payment. Well, he doesn't have the young goat. And so she says, well, I need a pledge. I need something that, is going to ensure that you're actually going to send me the goat. Okay. He said, what pledge shall I give you? She replied, your signet and your cord and your staff that is in your hand. So he gave them to her and went into her, and she conceived by him. Then she arose and went away, and taking off her veil, she put on the garments of her widowhood. Okay. So Tamar, very shrewd, she says, okay, I want a pledge that you're really going to make good with the payment. And he willingly, he gives her his signet. Not, sometimes it was a ring, other times it was, in this case it seems like it was something, even if it was a ring, because it could still be a ring, on a cord like a lanyard, okay? And that was distinctly his mark. It identified who he was. And his staff was also identifiable as his, okay? So, it'd be kind of like if a guy gave his phone and his photo ID and his thumbprint and said, here you go, you can have those, and that will ensure that I'll come, and give you your goat, okay? So Judah does this, and it's kind of symbolic of what he's doing in himself, in the sense that he's giving his very identity as a covenant man in order to fulfill his sexual desires with a Canaanite prostitute connected to Canaanite gods. He's willing to do that. Okay? So if you've noticed, when we started in verse 1, it's been a down. He went down, didn't he? And he's still going down. He's not quite coming up. Verse 20. Yeah, I know he went up to Enaim, but yeah. When Judah sent the young goat by his friend the Adamite to take back the pledge from the woman's hand, he did not find her. And he asked the men of that place, where is the cult prostitute who was at Enaim, at the roadside? And they said, no cult prostitute has been here. So he returned to Judah and said, I have not found her. Also the men of the place said, no cult prostitute has been here. And Judah replied, let her keep the things as her own, or we shall be laughed at. You see, I sent this young goat, and you did not find her. Okay, so Judah, he sends his friend Hira, the Adamite, with the young goat to go and pay the prostitute the debt that he owes and get his belongings back, his ID back. Yeah. Now Hira, he can't find her, and he's asked around all the guys. Yeah, it said he asked the men, right? And they're like, no, sorry, hasn't been a prostitute like that around there. And so he can't find her, and it's getting embarrassing for him to look, yeah, because she's not there. Now, Judah he's embarrassed here, and some have suggested that he is embarrassed because he's been with a prostitute. I don't think that's the case. The reason why he's embarrassed is because he's been so dumb as to leave all of his really important forms of ID with this woman. And word's going to get out because he can't find her. And so they're like, okay, she can keep him, so let's get out of here. Yeah? His pride is hurt because he's done a very dumb thing on multiple levels. Verse 24. About 3 months later, Judah was told, Tamar, your daughter-in-law, has been immoral. Moreover, she is pregnant by immorality. And Judah said, bring her out and let her be burned. That's grace. And as she was brought out, she sent word to her father-in-law, by the man to whom these belong, I am pregnant. And she said, please identify those things, the signet and the cord and the staff. Then Judah identified them and said, she is more righteous than I, since I did not give her my son Shelah, and he did not know her again. All right, so the 3 months have gone by. Tamar is found to be pregnant. Judah is very ungraciously, his response in his self-righteousness is that he declares, bring her out and let her be burned. I'll burn her to death. Great guy, huh? Now, stoning was the usual form of punishment for adultery. Yeah. Some prostitution was burning, but not usually this case. Okay. Judah was not considering God's righteousness in this. He was merely wanting to get rid of the woman that he has believed caused the death of his sons. And now she's brought dishonor on the family because she's pregnant, being immoral. But when Tamar shows Judah his signet, his cord, his staff, and she says, pregnant by this man, he's humbled, thankfully. And he says, she is more righteous than I. C.H. Spurgeon, he said, we are very quick-sighted to the faults of others, but how profoundly blind we are to our own. And I'm sure you're familiar with when Jesus said this, why do you see the speck in your brother's eye, but do not notice the log in your own eye? And that's a huge speck, log. Now, he doesn't say stick or branch. He says log, okay? Or how can you say to your brother, let me take the speck out of your eye when there's a log in your own eye? You hypocrite, first take the log out of your own eye, and then you will see clearly to take the speck out of your brother's eye. Yeah. Oswald Chambers, in his devotional Utmost for My Highest, commenting on what Jesus said. The things we condemn in others are often the very things we are guilty of ourselves. We are very quick to see the speck in the other person's eye, but we are absolutely blind to the log in our own. And that is very true. Yeah. And that Judah, missing his sin, wanting to burn Tamar. Yeah. And he's had to confess, she is more righteous than I. And we are thankful for that. But that's not saying very much, is it? More righteous than his actions is not. It's not a whole lot. Yeah, he was not a very righteous man, except that he was, in the covenant family. Yeah, and Tamar has stooped to very unrighteous means in order to gain the right that Judah was supposed to have given her with his third son. Okay, so this is a yucky chapter in the Bible. Verse 27. When the time of her labor came, there were twins in her womb. And when she was in labor, one put out a hand, and the midwife took and tied a scarlet thread on his hand, saying, this one came out first. But as he drew back his hand, behold, the brother came out. And she said, what a breach you have made for yourself. Therefore his name was called Perez. Afterward, his brother came out with the scarlet thread on his hand, and his name was called Zerah. Okay, so by God's grace, Tamar, she doesn't have daughters. She has 2 sons. Okay, and it's important she had sons because they carried on the lineage, the name. Yeah, Perez, Zerah, and one of the reasons this ugly chapter is in the Bible is because we know that through the line of Perez, Jesus, our Messiah, would be born. Okay? Tamar joins the likes of Rahab, Ruth, and Bathsheba. Now, 3 of those 4 women were not Israelites. Bathsheba is the only one that's an Israelite. They all have interesting marital or sexual contacts. Yeah? And all of them, by God's grace, are links in the lineage of Jesus. And that it just displays the awesome grace of God. God overcoming people's sinfulness, people's weakness, and his grace coming through. Now, some people read a story like this here, and they say, okay, then God approves of deception and illicit behavior. And it's, no, that's not the case. Yeah. The Bible it's descriptive. It's recording for us the raw truth of what happened. It's not being prescriptive here. It's not endorsing their behavior. We're just being told what happened, yeah? When Judas says, she is more righteous than I mean, that's a relative statement on his part, yeah? Tamar was in the right only in the sense that she should have been married to be, part of the lineage there. So it's God's grace, yeah. The line of the Messiah being extended through Perez, yeah, in spite of human sin, and not because he endorsed it. Okay, I wasn't really looking forward to this chapter. We made it and we're done. So we can move on. Yeah? And now we can turn to what we've all been wanting to know. What's been happening with Joseph for 20 years? What has been going on? Verse 39. Verse 39. How about chapter 39, verse 1? Now Joseph had been brought down to Egypt, and Potiphar, an officer of Pharaoh, the captain of the guard, an Egyptian, had bought him from the Ishmaelites who had brought him down there. The Lord was with Joseph, and he became a successful man. And he was in the house of his Egyptian master. His master saw that the Lord was with him, and that the Lord caused all that he did to succeed in his hands. So Joseph found favor in his sight and attended him, and he made him overseer of his house and put him in charge of all that he had. From the time that he made him overseer in his house and over all that he had, the Lord blessed the Egyptian's house for Joseph's sake. The blessing of the Lord was on all that he had in his house and field. So he left all that he had in Joseph's charge. And because of him, he had no concern about anything but the food that he ate. Now Joseph was handsome in form and appearance. All right. Brought down. 2 times in the Hebrew, Joseph, we're told, was brought down. Not on his accord, but because the Ishmaelites brought him down there to sell him in Egypt. Okay? It highlights for us that Joseph was involuntarily, forcefully taken down to Egypt, in direct contrast to Judah, who had voluntarily went down to the Canaanites. Yeah? So unlike Judah, Joseph also has the testimony that although he was seemingly alone, he was not alone. The Lord was with Joseph, we're told. And Potiphar noticed something about Joseph. He noticed that Joseph was blessed and that his labors were blessed. And over time, as he put Joseph in charge of everything, everything was being blessed. And this is the promise of God's covenant, right? That he made to Abraham. You would be a blessing, right? I will bless you, and you will be a blessing to those around you. And that's what's happening here with Joseph. You know, Joseph could have been purchased by anybody. He could have been purchased to have been a common hard laborer, which usually meant you died young and had a miserable existence until you died. But that's not what happens. He's bought by Potiphar, who is the captain of the guard, which also means that he was the chief of the executioners. Okay, so he was a pretty powerful guy, pretty important guy, a dangerous guy as well, yeah. But here God puts Joseph in his home, and in some ways, this is kind of like Joseph going back home. Why? What was Joseph doing before he left? He was being trained and he was managing his father's stuff. That's what he's being trained to do. Okay? Now he's doing that, but he's learning how to do so in an Egyptian context, Egyptian culture, and probably on a larger scale. Okay? So God was with Joseph. He's protecting Joseph. He's blessing Joseph. He's a slave, yes, but for a slave, he's in a really good spot as a slave. Okay. Now, Potiphar, being a man of wealth, he would have had a big house, kind of like this, a good-sized place, yeah, where there was, storage, place to entertain visitors, all that sort of stuff, and then this doesn't include all of the fields and everything else that Potiphar would have possessed, this is just an example of a typical what they think, right? Potiphar's house has not been found. Okay, that would be cool, but. And one of the things to note is that number 6 there, and this is AI generated, so this thing's a mess. But there is Potiphar's wife's spot, the harem spot. Okay, so everywhere else would have been on limits for Joseph. That spot's off limits to Joseph. For good reason. Yeah, I think we know the reason why it's off limits, okay? So God has put Joseph, good spot, and God is honing Joseph's managerial skills and educating him in Egyptian culture and customs. He's not just caring for the house, he's caring for everything that supports Potiphar. So that means his fields, the other servants below Joseph, the trading goods, different things that are happening, economically, that kind of stuff. And all is going well. It's going really good. But like each one of us in our walks of faith, we have times where things are going, seemingly really good. And then there's times of temptation and attack. And, well, Joseph, his attack, temptation, is going to come in the form of Potiphar's wife. So, chapter 39, once again, verse 7. And after a time, his master's wife cast her eyes on Joseph and said, "Lie with me." But he refused and said to his master's wife, "Behold, because of me, my master has no concern about anything in the house, and he has put everything that he has in my charge. He is not greater in this house than I am, nor has he kept back anything from me except you, because you are his wife." Reminder, hint, hint. "How can I do this great wickedness and sin against God?" And she spoke to Joseph day after day, and he would not listen to her, to lie beside her, or to be with her. But one day, when he went into the house to do his work, and none of the men of the house were there in the house, she caught him by his garment, saying, "Lie with me." Stop there. So we've already been told Joseph's a good-looking guy. And not only is he a good-looking guy, it's obvious that his life is blessed, yeah? And Potiphar's wife longingly looks upon this young man, and she wants more than what his servant duties require, yeah? And as I've been studying this, I was reminded of different examples of people that I have known over the years. And, you know, there's a warning for us in the sense that as believers, unbelievers can be attracted to us. They may be physically attracted to us or to you. And they might not realize it, but they see God's blessing upon your life and his character being revealed through you. And they may desire you like Potiphar's wife desired Joseph, but they don't really want anything to do with the Lord. They want you, or what they think is you. I mean, part of it is you, but part of it is Jesus within you and God's blessing upon your life, yeah? And the examples that I thought of people that I've known, young ladies, yeah, that, you know, men attracted to them, and we had one lady in particular where, you know, the young man, he was willing, he would come to church with her, and it was all about her. And he was able to kind of pretend that he was a believer. And then as soon as that that's when you take ring and finger and you put them together, you get a ringer. As soon as that ring, it got put on her finger, they were both gone from church. Yeah. And it didn't get any better after that. And so we have to beware that people may be drawn to us, young ladies, young men, older folks too. If you're single or even if you're not, I guess these days, just to beware. The motives may not be right, and we have to weigh up. You know, especially if there's not, are they a believer or are they not a believer? Okay? That's the question. All right, now, here's this temptation for Joseph, and Potiphar's wife, she's at home all the time. She's there, and she probably arranged to tempt Joseph in a variety of ways to try to get him to be with her, and her temptation becomes very direct. Lie with me. And it tells us that it happens day after day. So it's not a short time, yeah? And then on this final occasion, no one else is around. Did she arrange that? I don't know. But no one else is around, and she knows it, yeah. And she says, lie with me. Now, there's a lot of young men, especially in that position where Joseph finds himself, that they would have given in. They would have thought, you know what? God's let me be sold into slavery. I'm living in Egypt as a slave. They would use their circumstances as an excuse for sin. There have been Christian men that have wound up on this island because of, looking for asylum or refugee status. And they're put in a position where they are tempted to, are they going to live like a believer or not? And, I've had some great testimonies of guys that, they've chosen to live like believers, and they've suffered because of that in one sense, but then God blessed them because they chose what is right. Others, bad decisions, yeah? They might have also thought in the position that Joseph is in, is that they could use this for leverage, as long as Potiphar doesn't find out. But they can use it, for their own personal gain. I mean, think about it. This was Judah. What would Judah do? We already know what Judah would do. Yeah? Or any of the other brothers. What would they do? Yeah? Joseph's between 17 and 20 years old. He's a young guy. But his response is great. But he refused and said to his master's wife, behold, because of me, my master, has no concern about anything in the house. And that last bit, how then can I do this great wickedness and sin against God? Sin against God. How could I do that? And his answer isn't so much, I can't sin against Potiphar. Yeah, there's an element to that there, but it's more this great wickedness and sin against God. And the word that he uses for wickedness is the same word that was used to describe being wicked. Yeah? Meaning ruin, to spoil, wickedness. And he died. Yeah? And Joseph, he's given this opportunity to commit ruin and wickedness. And he's like, no. He recognizes it for what it is, and he's going to flee. Yeah. He says it's great wickedness. He's like, this is not a small thing. This is an enormous thing. This isn't a little mistake. This would be a huge evil in the eyes of God. And adultery, even now among most people in the world, it's seen as, okay, well, that's an infringement against the marriage contract or whatever, against the husband or the wife. But Joseph elevates it far, far, far above that. He recognizes, Potiphar, he would be the victim, but the ultimate offense would be against God. I would be sinning against God. Why would I do that? This reminds me of David, Psalm 51, where he, as confessing his sin. And he says, and he sinned against Bathsheba and her husband Uriah, having him, murdered after committing adultery with his wife. But he brings it into perspective when he says, against you, you alone, I have sinned and done this evil in your sight. So you are right when you pass sentence. You are blameless when you judge. So Joseph, he sees it for what it really is. He's all alone with Potiphar's wife. She is determined. She's grabbed a hold of his garment. She is his boss in a sense. He's merely a slave. This has been going on for a while, and so he might have been tempted to give in, but we see what he does. Yeah. But he left his garment in her hand and fled and got out of the house. And as soon as she saw that he had left his garment in her hand and had fled out of the house, she called to the men of her household and said to them, "See, he has brought among us a Hebrew to laugh at us. He came in to me to lie with me, and I cried out with a loud voice and cried out. He left his garment beside me and fled and got out of the house. Then she laid up his garment by her until his master came home. And she told him the same story, saying, the Hebrew servant whom you have brought among us came in to me to laugh at me. But as soon as I lifted up my voice and cried, he left his garment beside me and fled out of the house." As soon as his master heard the words that his wife spoke to him, "This is the way your servant treated me," his anger was kindled. And Joseph's master took him and put him into the prison, the place where the king's prisoners were confined, and he was there in prison. But the Lord was with Joseph and showed him steadfast love and gave him favor in the sight of the keeper of the prison. And the keeper of the prison put Joseph in charge of all the prisoners who were in the prison. Whatever was done there, he was the one who did it. The keeper of the prison paid no attention to anything that was in Joseph's charge, because the Lord was with him, and whatever he did, the Lord made it succeed. All right. So Joseph, he chose to run. But that meant leaving the garment behind. You can't reason with temptation and lust. Yeah, you got to run from it. However we can. Amen. 2 Timothy 2:22. I think Paul probably had this in mind. Joseph. So flee youthful passions and pursue righteousness, faith, love, and peace, along with those who call on the name of the Lord from a pure heart. Don't chase the passions. No. Run after the other stuff. How about righteousness and love and faith and peace? Run after those things. Yeah? Joseph runs. Romans chapter 13, verse 14. We're exhorted to put on the Lord Jesus Christ, to put on our new nature, to be led by the Spirit and not be led by the flesh. Make no provision for the flesh to gratify its desires. And if you've been with me for any length of time in the classes, you may remember that no provision there, it literally means no forethought. It means to make no preparation for, and they would use this in regards to a military engagement where they would say, give no quarter, which means no surrender. Doesn't matter. It's to the death. No quarter. No compromise with the enemy at all. And so, what are we being told in Romans? We're being told in Romans, put it to death, no provision, no quarter for the flesh. Put it to death, move away. Yeah? So, leaving his garment, most likely he was not naked. Most likely he had an undergarment. Most likely he left his robe, his outer garment, regardless, it was not the most dignified thing to do, humanly speaking, to be running away like that, but it was the best thing for him to do. He's keeping his purity, he's keeping his dignity, he's keeping his relationship, sound before the Lord. He doesn't care about his appearance, the embarrassment. It's all about escape, running. Alan Redpath wrote, there is no winning without a war. There is no opportunity without opposition. There is no victory without vigilance. Yeah. To be vigilant. Yeah. We face the war, but it's an opportunity as we face the opposition, yeah, to overcome as we're vigilant in our faith, pursuing the Lord and fleeing from the things of the flesh. You've probably noticed with Potiphar's wife, 2 times she refers to Joseph not by name, but the Hebrew. Okay? That's because in Egypt, that's like a derogatory term. They didn't think too highly. Hebrews, okay? Moses would have highlighted this. Yeah. She's playing the prejudice card there. And she's shifting the blame on Joseph, yeah, and Potiphar. You know, for Potiphar, she's saying, you brought him into the house. It's your fault that he was here. Your fault. And then she said that, you know, he, verse 17, came in to laugh at me. To laugh at me. This is the same word that was used when Ishmael, remember, he was mocking Isaac? Yeah. This is the same word that was used when Isaac and Rebekah were together and caught by Abimelech. You know, Abimelech was looking out his window and they were laughing together. Okay? It's the same word that she uses here. And so she is accusing Joseph of trying to sexually toy with her and to rape her. That is the direction that she's going. Okay? So notice how quickly her desire for Joseph has led to, let's kill him. Yeah? He's the one to blame. And of course, you too, Potiphar. Yeah. What she couldn't possess or control, she now wants to destroy. She's trying to cover things up for herself. And you know, that is the nature of the flesh. It demands its own way. When it's denied, and it strikes out in vengeance. Yeah. So, things have gotten a little worse for Joseph. He's now in prison. And we'll leave him there. We'll take a little break. And we'll come back. And we'll see how he's doing. All right. Welcome back. Okay. So we left Joseph thrown in prison. This particular prison seems to be the king's prisoner's prison, which means that it was probably not your standard criminal prison, but those that had more to do with offenses against the king or the king's officials. Okay? Now, there's a good chance, I believe, that Potiphar knew that his wife was not necessarily telling the truth, because the normal punishment for Joseph would have been to put him to death. And he doesn't do that. He puts him in prison, and he doesn't put him in any prison. He puts him in a prison that, in his position, he would have been ultimately over. Yeah, so he would have been the boss of the prison over the warden of the prison. So it's Potiphar's prison. Okay? Yeah. So, yeah. Well, I mean, it's not his personal prison, but he's overseeing it for Pharaoh. Okay? And we were just talking about this in the break, and I do have proof. It is here in my notes. There are many things that, is that that the right thing might get you in trouble. Yeah? And we saw that with Joseph, and that would Philip and I would talk about that. you might get in trouble with people, but God's favor, God's blessings, yeah? Here he is. He's falsely accused, and life is difficult, but the Lord was with Joseph and showed him steadfast love. Yeah? Steadfast love. Mercy, hesed, upon Joseph. Okay? So we can do the right thing, and people might not be happy about it, but that's okay. Because we're not living for them, we're living for the Lord. And the Lord sees it, and he will honor it in his way, in his perfect timing. Jesus said this, "Blessed are those who are persecuted for righteousness' sake, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are you when others revile you and persecute you and utter all kinds of evil against you falsely on my account. Rejoice and be glad." Well, that's the converse of the way that we want to respond many times, right? Rejoice and be glad. Why? For your reward is great in heaven, for so they persecuted the prophets who were before you. Peter wrote, "If you are insulted for the name of Christ, you are blessed, because the Spirit of glory and of God rests upon you." And so Joseph, he's in prison, but he's prospering there. Yeah? Seeking to oppress him, but God is blessing his life. Yeah? Even though on the face of it, it doesn't look good. Yeah? One kind of hardship followed by another. But in God's economy, yeah, this is good. This is good. He's working out things in Joseph through the stuff that is happening to him. Okay, chapter 40. Sometime after this, the cupbearer of the king of Egypt and his baker committed an offense against their lord, the king of Egypt. Many think that there was maybe an assassination attempt or plot or something like that these guys were suspected of being a part of. And Pharaoh was angry with these two officers, the chief cupbearer and the chief baker, and he put them in custody in the house of the captain of the guard, in the prison where Joseph was confined. The captain of the guard appointed Joseph to be with them, and he attended them. They continued for some time in custody. And one night they both dreamed, the cupbearer and the baker, of the king of Egypt, who were confined in the prison. Each his own dream, and each dream with its own interpretation. When Joseph came to them in the morning, he saw that they were troubled. So he asked Pharaoh's officers who were with him in custody in his master's house, "Why are your faces downcast today?" So once again, somehow the cupbearer, the baker offend Pharaoh. They land in prison. Joseph is commanded, it's part of his job to take care of them. And one morning he notices their sadness that's more than their normal sadness. And he asks, "Why are your faces cast down today?" Joseph has been a victim of human trafficking, false accusations, unjust imprisonment, and many people in his position, they would be consumed with themselves and feel like they have the right to be consumed with themselves, their difficult circumstances. Oh, woe is me. Yeah? He could have served the cupbearer and the baker out of his duty to do so. That's just what he did. But he's doing that with so much more. He shows compassion. Remember back to the young Joseph of those first dreams. Remember that Joseph. Remember in his youth and being naive and being a little proud, he could not see or did not care how his brothers thought of him and his dreams. This is a different Joseph, right? The trials that he has experienced has shaped now that Joseph sees people a bit differently than he saw them before. And he cares. He's not so consumed with his own difficult circumstances that he misses that these two men, they're troubled. And so God is working this godly character in Joseph. And God, the difficulties that he brings our way, he's got the same goal there. Romans 5. More than that, we rejoice in our sufferings, knowing that sufferings produce endurance, and endurance produces character. Character produces hope. And hope does not put us to shame, because God's love has been poured into our hearts through the Holy Spirit who has been given to us. That trials that come our way, God allows to come our way, that as we respond to that, especially if we respond in the right way, trusting God, not getting consumed with our circumstances, it's going to produce endurance. It's going to produce a godly character and fuel our hope that we have in the Lord and in his eternal promises. So Joseph has been allowing God to work in his life. He could have been bitter. He could have been self-absorbed. He could have been filled with self-pity, leaving no room for compassion. But that's not what we see here. And I'm going to read a quote. I've quoted J.H. Jowett before. I'll quote him again. It's old school. If it goes over your head, don't worry about it. Written a long time ago. The gospel of a broken heart demands the ministry of bleeding hearts. When our sympathy lacks the element of blood, it also lacks the element of life. It is the life which is in the blood, which is the quickening power in the world. We can never heal the needs that we do not feel. Tearless hearts can never be the heralds of the passion, Jesus' passion. We must get into the fellowship of the King's sufferings if we would be ministers of the King's grace. It's a great book, The Passion for Souls, if you like reading those sorts of things. I had never heard of J.H. Jowett. I was in the UK, found a cool looking book, title, The Passion for Souls. And I'm like, I could use some passion for souls. I picked it up, and man, it will challenge you, but it will also encourage you. If you want, I can post a PDF on our WhatsApp group if you want. Another quote from Jowett: we can measure our likeness to the Lord by the range of our sensitiveness to the world's sorrow and pain. Are we numb to the world? Because the Lord isn't. He's very aware. And his compassion is being extended to the world. Well, Joseph has heard about these dreams. So he's asked them, well, first he's told them interpretations belong to God, but tell them to me. Verse 9. So the chief cupbearer told his dream to Joseph and said to him, in my dream there was a vine before me, and on the vine there were 3 branches, and on it budded, its blossoms shot forth, and the clusters ripened into grapes. Pharaoh's cup was in my hand, and I took the grapes and pressed them into Pharaoh's cup, and placed the cup in Pharaoh's hand. Then Joseph said to him, this is its interpretation. The 3 branches are 3 days. In 3 days Pharaoh will lift up your head and restore you to the office you shall place Pharaoh's cup in his hand, as formerly when you were his cupbearer. Only remember me when it is well with you, and please do me this kindness to mention me to Pharaoh, and so get me out of this house. For I was indeed stolen out of the land of the Hebrews, and also here I have done nothing that they should put me into the pit. Okay, so that's an encouraging thing for the cupbearer. So the baker, he sees that it's favorable. He's encouraged by that. He said to Joseph, I also had a dream. And there were 3 cakes of baskets on my head. And in the uppermost basket, there were all sorts of baked food for Pharaoh. But the birds were eating it out of the basket on my head. And Joseph answered and said, this is the interpretation. The 3 baskets are 3 days. In 3 days, Pharaoh will lift up your head from you and hang you on a tree, and the birds will eat the flesh from you. Sorry about that, but that's the interpretation. On the 3rd day, when Pharaoh's birthday, he made a feast for all of his servants, and he lifted up the head of the chief cupbearer and the head of the chief baker among the servants. He restored the chief cupbearer to his position, and he placed the cup in the Pharaoh's hand. But he hanged the chief baker as Joseph had interpreted to them. Yet the chief cupbearer did not remember Joseph, but forgot him. Oh gosh. So Joseph, he's very bold. He interprets both of the men's dreams. 3 days it's going to happen. Your heads are going to be lifted up. One head lifted up, it's going to be good. One head lifted up, not so good. That means you're going to get hung. Okay. And Joseph saw his chance there with the cupbearer. Maybe God is going to use the cupbearer to let him know about me, the injustice, and, get me out of here. But then we have those really sad words, right? Yet the chief cupbearer did not remember Joseph, but forgot him. And every time I read that, I think, no, you can't forget Joseph. I mean, Joseph just interpreted your dream. He gave you good news, good things happened, everything's good, and you forgot. Like, how do you forget? How is that possible? Well, unfortunately, people are fallible and they forget. It just happens, As a teenager, I gave a guy a bicycle that looked just like that, amazingly enough. His bike had been stolen. His family kind of not financially affluent, let's say. And he needed the bike to do a paper route. And so I gave him, I had a different bike. I wasn't really, different kind of bike. I was into BMX, if you know what that was. I wasn't so much into riding this thing so much anymore. But this was a gift from my parents and grandparents. So it was a sacrifice to me at the time. I think I was like 13. And, I didn't keep in touch with that guy many years. Eventually, Facebook happened. For some of you, you're like, it happened? It never, yeah, there was a time when it didn't exist. It was a better time. And anyway, someone, we got connected on Facebook. And it, came up, me giving him a bicycle, and the guy, no, I'd never given him a bicycle. He had completely forgotten. And I'm like, wow, how could he forget that? I mean, that was such a sacrifice for me, but he forgot. People forget. They're fallible, yeah? They're forgetful, they're ungrateful. And so it was with the cupbearer. The cupbearer, he forgets, but God's watching, right? God's in control. And the thanks and praise of men, that's passing. God's work, everlasting. All right. Verse 1, chapter 41. After 2 whole years, Pharaoh dreamed that he was standing by the Nile. 2 whole years. I mean, sometimes years go by slow when you're waiting for something. Yeah. He's waiting to be delivered, right? He doesn't know it's going to come. Many years ago, shortly after my wife and I were married, we were missionaries in Hungary, and we were teaching the young Hungarian kids how to play two-hand touch American football, which, two-hand touch, yeah? And a rather big lad, two-hand touched me into a tree when I was moving at speed, yeah? And so that touch ended up my kneecap being off center for over a year. And we had a conference, and I wasn't sleeping too good. It was painful. And anyway, we had a conference. There was a missions pastor that was there from another church. He found out about my situation. He came to us and shared with us that, he would get us help. He actually knew one of the guys that designed orthoscopic surgery for the knee. And, as soon as he got back to America, he would look into it, help get some fundage for us. And, he would be in touch. And he left. And we waited. And we waited. And whenever the phone rang, which wasn't very often, my poor wife thought it was him. And it wasn't. And he came back a year later for the next conference. And I wasn't a happy camper with him. It had been a year. And my leg was still not doing great. It was doing worse. And, challenged him on it. He had never made that promise. He felt so bad that I was in such pain and that there must have been a misunderstanding, a miscommunication. And that was difficult. The wait. But you know what? People can let us down. But I was in the Lord's hands. He took care of me. I ended up not having to have surgery. I ended up getting the right person at the right time who just said, you know what, we're going to give you this stuff to build up your cartilage. You're going to ride a bicycle for 15 minutes a day, and it's going to be painful. But eventually, it's going to pull your kneecap right back, and it's going to be okay. And that's exactly what happened. Exactly what happened, yeah. So Joseph is waiting. And listen to what Psalm 105 has to say about Joseph. Joseph was sold as a slave. His feet were hurt with fetters. His neck was put in a collar of iron. Gives you a little bit more detail there about what happened when he got sold into slavery. Yeah? A little more dramatic and painful. Until what he had said had come to pass, the word of the Lord tested him. That word for tested, it's like when metal is smelted to get or refined, all the impurities being brought out of it. And so Joseph has been through a lot. And he's not being punished. He's being refined. God is preparing him for what he has purposed him for. Yeah, and it's the same thing for us, that when we're in difficulties, we're in trials, that it could be punishment if we are in sin, and we need to deal with that. Ask the Lord if that is the case. But otherwise, if that is not the case, then he is just seeking to purify us, to make us more like Jesus through the trials, to build that character. Yeah? That's what's happening with Joseph. So, 2 whole years, and Pharaoh has dreamed, and behold, there came up out of the Nile 7 cows, attractive and plump. I've never thought of cows as attractive. Plump for sure. And they fed him the reed grass, and behold, 7 other cows, ugly and thin, came out of the Nile after them and stood by the other cows on the bank of the river. And the ugly, thin cows ate up the 7 attractive, plump cows. And Pharaoh awoke. He woke up. That was a weird dream. That's weird. I'm sure you've probably woken up from weird dreams, or probably worse than that, right? And then he fell asleep, and he dreamed a second time. And behold, 7 ears of grain, plump and good, were growing on one stalk. And behold, after them sprouted up 7 ears, thin and blighted by the east wind. And the thin ears swallowed up the 7 plump and full ears. And Pharaoh awoke, and behold, it was a dream. So in the morning, his spirit was troubled, and he sent and called for all the magicians of Egypt and all its wise men. Pharaoh told them his dreams, but there was none who could interpret them to Pharaoh. So, Pharaoh has these dreams. The 7 plump and attractive cows. And the 7 not so good-looking cows. And they gobble them up, right? The 7 plump ears, good-looking ears, and they get gobbled up by the blighted ears. Yeah? And Pharaoh is troubled by this. He gets all the smart guys and the magicians and everybody gets them all together, and they don't know what's going on. They do not have an interpretation for the dreams. And it tells us that he was troubled when he woke up. It was troubling to him. And that word, it literally, it means to strike or to beat, like if, that picture there where, beating on the anvil. So he was troubled, it was unsettling for him, and it was unsettling to the degree where it just wasn't going away. He's like, what's with these dreams? What does this mean? And he's troubled, and so he gathers everybody that he thinks can help him, and they can't help him. He's still troubled. Nothing that the priests or whatever, they can't do anything for him. And then, maybe this is like the guy with the bike. He'll remember. He'll remember. I'm not offended, though. Then the chief cupbearer said to the Pharaoh, I remember my offenses today. When Pharaoh was angry with his servants and put me and the chief baker in custody in the house of the captain of the guard, we dreamed on the same night, he and I, each having a dream with its own interpretation. A young Hebrew was with us, a servant of the captain of the guard. When we told him, he interpreted our dreams to us, giving an interpretation to each man according to his dream. And as he interpreted to us, so it came about. I was restored to my office, and the baker was hanged. Then Pharaoh sent and called Joseph, and they quickly brought him out of the pit. And when he had shaved himself and changed his clothes, he came before Pharaoh. So 1 minute, Joseph is in prison, wearing his prison attire, serving as he has been serving for many years, not 4. And suddenly, he's shaven, he's wearing a new set of clothes, and he's standing in front of the most powerful man in the world, in a sense, at this point. Okay? And he's not merely there just to see Pharaoh, but he is supposed to give counsel to Pharaoh. How he conducts himself in this moment is shaped by who he has been over these many years. Shaped by his faith, his commitment to the Lord, and what he knew to be true. Okay? Now you and I, we may not be whisked away to meet some president or some important person. Yeah? That's okay. But God has his way of bringing us across the paths of people that in God's eyes are just as important as the supposed important people. Yeah? People that he desires us to be a witness to. Yeah? And whatever happens in those moments when we are brought across those people's paths, that is determined much by how we have been living our lives of faith up to that very moment. Yeah? We don't get ready for that moment in the moment. I mean, the Spirit can, praise God, he can meet us in the moment. But we get ready in the months and years before that moment. Yeah? In the pits and the Potiphar's houses and the prisons that the Lord takes us through. And if we're not ready in that moment, it's a sad moment. I've told this story before. There was a time when in our ministry when we were church planting in the UK, and there was a lot of work that needed to be done on the building, and I was doing it, and I was not only doing the work on the building, but I was everything but the Sunday school teacher. So I was doing everything, and I needed to get everything done before Sunday, and I was getting up early, doing a lot of physical work on the building all day long, going home, going to bed, getting up early, doing the same thing, and feeling like I was ministering to a building more than I was ministering to anything else. And I was not. Yeah, it was, I needed to get a lot done, but I was not spending the time with the Lord that I should have been spending with the Lord. And one morning, it's just this rotation, and I get up, I get down there, and there's this guy that we affectionately called Dodgy Dave. Because Dodgy Dave, you just never knew what Dodgy Dave was up to, He was definitely, he was selling goods. He was selling cars. He was selling substances. He was selling things on our street. And, when we first got there, he let me know if I needed anything, he could get it for me. Dave, very helpful guy. He's the kind of guy that, you come up to him and he's got like 5 phones lined up there and he's like switching out the SIM cards and everything. He's just talking to you like this is a normal thing that you do. And you're like, oh, okay, Dave. So anyway, he rolls up and I'm just, okay, there's Dodgy Dave. And I say, how you doing? And he says, I'm all right. And then he starts to cry. And he's a big guy. He's a tough guy. And then he begins to tell me that his girlfriend had had a miscarriage that night. And I was not prepared for that moment. God is gracious and he can give us words to say, but I was not ready for that moment. I missed that moment big time with Dodgy Dave. And I regret that to this day. Yeah? And so far better for us to make sure we're walking with the Lord as closely as we can, making sure that we're spending time with him, communing with him, and being ready and shaped for those moments. And man, I pray that Dodgy Dave is not so dodgy anymore, and that life is better for him. Verse 16, it says, no, it's 15. And Pharaoh said to Joseph, I have dreamed a dream. No. Yeah, I have dreamed a dream, and there is no one who can interpret it. I have heard it said of you that when you hear a dream, you can interpret it. Joseph answered Pharaoh, it is not in me. God will give Pharaoh a favorable answer. Great response. There's a lot in that statement. There is humility. It's not in me. God's the one that can interpret dreams. I'm just an instrument. Yep. It's God. God deserves any glory, right? And it's an act of statement of faith, really, yeah? He tells Pharaoh that God can interpret dreams and that Pharaoh's going to get a favorable answer from the Lord. That's a step of faith. What if God decides to be silent that day? Or what if it's not a favorable answer? But Joseph, he's convinced. He's believing that the Lord, he's got an answer for you. And so you see that, some people, they would have seen this as their moment with Pharaoh. To tell Pharaoh all the rubbish that's happened to them, and they're going to, oh yeah, I can interpret a dream, but first, let me tell you how I got here, how miserable life has been. And if I'm going to help you out with the dream, you're going to help me out. What if Jacob was there? Or Judah was there? What would they have done? We know for sure what Judah would have done. I mean, Jacob would have done. He would have used it for leverage, yeah? But Joseph's not like that, yeah? Those dreams that he had as a youth, in the trials of the pit, Potiphar's house, the prison, God has been with him, and he's brought him to this moment, to this point, where he points to God rather than to himself. And I'm running out of time, but we're in the last chapter, so that's good. There's something here that we can miss, but I don't want you to miss. And that this moment here, it's much more than just about Joseph. This moment is about Pharaoh, and this moment is about all of the people that Pharaoh is ruling over at this time. All of the Egyptian people, yeah? God knows what they believe about their false gods. God knows what they believe about Pharaoh. Pharaoh, right there with the gods, yeah? This is a moment which is going to lead to years of witness from a man who knows the one true God who's above all gods. Yeah? An opportunity for God to reveal himself and draw them to him. Yeah? Because God has a heart for all people of all nations. We see in the scriptures that he puts people before pharaohs, before kings, before councils, before military rulers, before Caesar and his court. Why? Why does he do that? Because he has a heart for all people and all nations, and he wants to use his people as a witness up to the most powerful people down to the poorest people. And so we don't want to miss God's heart as we read through God's word. There's a purpose in here. Lots of things being worked out. Yeah? Okay. So where am I? 17. Then Pharaoh said, Joseph, behold, in my dream I was standing on the banks of the Nile. 7 cows, plump and attractive, came up out of the Nile and fed in the reed grass. 7 other cows came up after them, poor and very ugly and thin, such I had never seen before in all the land of Egypt. Maybe in the other lands, but not in Egypt. And the thin, ugly cows ate up the first 7 plump cows, but when they had eaten them, no one would have known that they had eaten them, for they were still as ugly at the beginning. Then I awoke. I also saw in my dream 7 ears growing on one stalk, full of good. 7 ears withered, thin, and blighted by the east wind, sprouted up after them, and the thin ears swallowed up the 7 good ears. And I told it to the magicians, but there was no one who could explain it to me. Then Joseph said to Pharaoh, the dreams of the Pharaoh are one. God has revealed to Pharaoh what he's about to do. The 7 good cows are 7 years, and the 7 good ears are 7 years. The dreams are one. The 7 lean and ugly cows came up after them are 7 years, and the 7 empty ears blighted by the east wind are also 7 years of famine. It is as I told Pharaoh. God has shown to Pharaoh what he's about to do. There will come 7 years of great plenty throughout all the land of Egypt. But after them there will arise 7 years of famine, and all the plenty will be forgotten in the land of Egypt. The famine will consume the land, and the plenty will be unknown in the land by reason of the famine that will follow, for it will be very severe. And the doubling of Pharaoh's dream means that the thing is fixed by God, and God will shortly bring it about. Now, therefore, let Pharaoh select a discerning and wise man, and set him over the land of Egypt. Let Pharaoh proceed to appoint overseers of the land and take 1/5 of the produce of the land of Egypt during the 7 plentiful years. And let them gather all the food of these years that are coming and store up the grain under the authority of Pharaoh for food in the cities. and let them keep it. The food shall be a reserve for the land against the 7 years of famine that are to occur in the land of Egypt, so that the land may not perish through famine. This must have been pretty astounding for Pharaoh to witness, and his advisors. Not only does he, interpret the dreams succinctly, he also lets him know that it was God's purpose in giving the dreams and how they should prepare for the famine. And I'm sure that hammering, unsettling thing that Pharaoh had about the dreams is now gone. Yeah? He knew that he had his answer in what Joseph had given him. Then, the proposal pleased Pharaoh and all his servants. And Pharaoh said to his servants, "Can we find a man like this in whom is the Spirit of God?" Then Pharaoh said to Joseph, "Since God has shown you all this, there's none so discerning and wise as you. You shall be over my house, and all my people shall order themselves as you command. Only as regards the throne will I be greater than you." And Pharaoh said to Joseph, "See, I have set you over all the land of Egypt." Then Pharaoh took his signet ring from his hand and put it in Joseph's hand, and clothed him in garments of fine linen, and put a gold chain about his neck. And he made him ride in his second chariot, and they called out before him, "Bow the knee." Thus he set him over all the land of Egypt. Moreover, Pharaoh said to Joseph, "I am Pharaoh, and without your consent no one shall lift up a hand or foot in all the land of Egypt." And Pharaoh called Joseph's name Zaphnath-Paneah, and he gave him in marriage Asenath, the father of Potiphera, priest of On. So Joseph went out of the land, over the land of Egypt. Wow. What a drastic turn of events. In less than 24 hours, Joseph comes from the prison, serving there, to being prime minister, vizier. There's other names for it, but that's roughly the title. Of Pharaoh's court, yeah, ruling over all of Egypt. Yeah, he's given a new name, Zaphnath-Paneah, which scholars believe either means God speaks and he lives, or revealer of secrets. Okay, he's no longer identified as a slave or a prisoner. Now he's, God speaks and he lives. Yeah, the revealer of secrets. Yeah. And he's given a signet ring. Signet ring. Pharaoh gives Joseph his signet ring, which means he has Pharaoh's authority over everything except for what Pharaoh said, everything except for the throne. You've got the authority. Yeah, that's everything, over everything. Remember, Judah had a signet ring, or a signet of sorts. Yeah, and he surrendered that to a prostitute to satisfy his fleshly desires. Yeah, Judah, he threw away his identity for a moment of pleasure. Yeah, Joseph has protected his purity in contrast, right? He had opportunity and he ran. Yeah, and he receives a signet ring from Pharaoh himself. Yeah, what Judah lost through compromise, Joseph gains and far much more because of his commitment to the Lord. Yeah, he's given garments of fine linen, a gold chain, a wife, Asenath. And so the contrast, right? He was in iron fetters, chains, an iron collar around his neck. Now he's in fine linen, has a gold chain around his neck. Yeah. F. B. Meyer wrote, "If Joseph had not been Egypt's prisoner, he would have never been Egypt's governor. The iron chain about his feet ushered in the golden chain about his neck." They estimate 13 years of slavery and imprisonment. Yeah. To bring Joseph to this place. Yeah. And our circumstances that we face, they can often feel like we are wearing prison clothes, iron fetters, and an iron collar on our neck. But in God's economy, as we walk by faith, trusting in Him, allowing Him to use those things for our good, He's going to use those for our good now and for our eternal good later. 1 Peter 5:6. Humble yourselves under the mighty hand of God, so that at the proper time He may exalt you. James wrote, blessed is the man who remains steadfast under trial, for when he has stood the test, he will receive the crown of life, which God has promised to those who love Him. And so, Judah's signet ring, Joseph's signet ring. Yeah. Joseph, that picture of willing to compromise and throw it away for a moment's sinful pleasure. Yeah. Joseph, instead, he surrenders himself to the Lord. And he, in return, is blessed as he resists sin and entrusts himself to the Lord. And so we began with the fact that, here was this cliffhanger, and we got that whole chapter on Judah. Why? Because the Lord was giving us a great contrast between these two characters. And who they're both examples. One's an example of, hey, don't do that. The other example is, hey, do that. He's a good guy to follow in the sense of his example. Yeah? So, let us close in prayer. Lord, thank you for how you have formed and shaped your word. We thank you, Lord, for these examples that we can learn from. And God, help us to be those that, like Joseph, are willing to flee from sin. Like Joseph, that we would be those that instead of responding to the trials, the difficulties, the unfairness of life, that instead of responding in bitterness and complaining and self-pity, Lord, that we would continue to cling on to you, to trust you, and to believe and know that you are able to work all things together for our good. That is your promise for those that are called, that know you and are walking with you. We thank you, Lord, and ask, God, that you would bless each one that is listening online, each one here. Give them a safe journey home and a good week as they walk with you. In Jesus' name, amen. Amen. Thank you very much. You made it.